let's put a little poll in, see how everyone's feeling. All right, I'm going to throw this poll up. Just how you feel about Redux. It's anonymous. Those of you that are like the lower end of it, feel free to put comments in there. Tell me what you're lost on, what you're really having issues with, what concepts you're having issues with. Would be great. And it is anonymous, so you can say whatever you'd like. Good deal. It's definitely the type of thing that does not come instantly. If any of you got it first try out last Tuesday, I would have been very, very surprised and impressed because it's something that takes a lot of exposure and a lot of repetition to really get. So where's the best place to put logic? In the actions or reducers? It depends on what logic. So let's actually, we can start recording. Cool, we already are. So I would say that what do the reducers do? Like what's the main purpose of a reducer? And we're going to go over it actually in a little bit more detail right now. But the main purpose of a reducer is just to update the state, right? So any logic you have, I'm assuming you mean like, wow, yeah, it depends. It's kind of a tricky question. There's a place for logic in the actions and there's a place for logic in the reducers. It really depends on what the logic is controlling. So, if it's updating the state based on the previous state, that logic goes in the reducer. Everything else goes in the action. Cool, glad to hear. Thursday was good. Awesome, cool. Okay, not an issue at all, just starting to get it. You've only been working with Redux, you've been working with Redux for less than a week. So just starting to get it is a totally fine place to be. So if you have any side effects based on action, the logic might be better than the action itself. Absolutely. You don't want any side effects at all in your reducers, right? So the action itself is where that logic would go. And we're going to see some logic in actions today with async stuff. So okay, we only have 19 votes in there. I'd love everyone to vote just to get a feel for where everyone's at. It is anonymous. You don't have to worry about anyone seeing you or whatever. Even though it doesn't matter, we're all here to learn, right? Cool. Yeah, I think that starting to get it is an okay place to be, right? It's totally fine place to be right now. Like I said, we've been working with this for 6 days. So yeah, just starting to get it. And these are difficult concepts, right? There's a reason this is the last section of our front-end curriculum because it's difficult. So just starting to get it is a great place to be. All right, let's start with today's lecture. I'm just sharing my screen to go over Trading Kit. This first thing I'm really going to talk about is much more theoretical and it has little to do with Redux itself and how we use Redux and how we use Redux with React. So it's this pattern called a finite state machine. You can read through this. It's in Trading Kit. But what happens essentially, and this is not even a concept to programming. It is a mathematical concept. So advanced math. This is where this concept comes from, the finite state machine. It's this concept that this item or this application that we have has a finite amount of state, a finite amount of states that the application can be in. And the application can only be in one of those at a time. So if you go to Wikipedia, they got a very interesting long article if you want to get really in depth into it. But I think this analogy right here of a coin turnstile really kind of is the simplest form of it. So if you've ever used a coin turnstile, those of you that are much younger than I maybe have never used one. But essentially, you go to hit the turnstile and it's locked, right? So if you've used like a subway or something like that, it's always locked. You can't just walk through it, right? And so you need to do something to it. So we have this state as locked right here, okay? Its current state is locked and the next state is locked. If we push on it, that next state is locked, right? So what we need to do is to put a coin or swipe our Metro card or Clipper card or whatever into it. And at that point, the current state is locked. The next state will be unlocked. Oh, wait, are you on my, oh, okay, let's start over. Why did it share my Slack? Thanks for putting that. Now can you see Wikipedia here? Let me get maybe wait for confirmation. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. All right, so let's go over this again. Coin turnstile, right here. I don't know if it'll make this bigger. Okay, this works. So coin operator turnstile. All right, you push on the bar. If it's locked and you don't do anything to it, the next state is going to be locked, right? If you put a coin in or swipe your card, etc., and it's currently in the locked state, the next state is going to be unlocked. So then you're going to hit the bar and it's going to turn for you and let you through, right? And then as soon as that happens, what state does it go back to? As soon as you walk through it, it goes back to locked, right? So how many possible states can this coin turnstile be in? 2. There is a finite amount of states that it can be in, and that is 2, right? It's the simplest thing we could think of, right? So let's think of an application that has a very simple application that has 2 states it could be in, and that's it. Just 2 states. What kind of ideas do you think could you come up with that just is 2 states? Log in, log out. Okay, cool. Toggle on and off. Yep. Right. So if you have, you know, just a checkbox, it can be in 2 possible states, right? Either not checked or checked. So that's a great analogy. Log in, log out. So you're either logged in or you're logged out. Right? It's essentially the coin turnstile, right? So if you log in, or if you're not logged in and you try to go to a locked area, it's going to stay locked. If you log in, it's going to go unlocked, right? So you'll have this in or out. I would say too, like a loading screen, right? It's either loading or it's loaded. So that's 2 states in it. So we bring up this idea because that's essentially what we are attempting to create with our React Redux app. there's a disclaimer in Training Kit here. Redux is not a finite state machine in and of itself. But the thinking in states helps us understand how Redux works. And we can utilize Redux and use it to create a finite state machine. Okay, so we can set up a certain amount of states that it could possibly be in, and then we use Redux to switch between those states. In a finite state machine, can an application be in two different states at the same time? We have one yes. I would love to hear any other guesses. We have a no. We have a lot of no's. The sheer nature of a finite state machine says no, right? We can only be in one state at one time. Okay, yeah, there's a quantum state machine. There you go. You're probably right. But yeah, we're only in one state at one time. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind, right? We don't want to be in two different states at the same time. We want to only be in one, and we want to build our application so that we are only in one state at a time. There's an article about state machines. Feel free to read it. It's a really great article. It goes in depth about how we use React and Redux to create this finite state machine. But there's a great diagram on here as well, where we have this three different states here, right? We have a is logged in or logged out. We have a pending, and we have an is logged in. Okay, and so we can see the different routes we can take to get between each of these states. So if we are logged out, we can request to log in, and we get to this pending state. So we've sent, we've sent a request to our server to log in. And depending on what our server says, we're either going to have failure, in this case, failure and log back out, or we're going to have success and log back in and log in. Okay, so now we're in this logged in state. We are not in either of these states, right? And then we request to log out. Okay, we go back to pending, back to our server. Failure is going to keep us logged in. Success is going to log us out. Okay, so it's this idea that our application only exists in one state at a time, and we can transition between them. And what we use to transition between these states, anyone have any idea? What we use to transition between the states? An action, yep. And that action gets sent to a reducer, and the reducer ultimately determines our states. So we have that action, and we tell our reducer to perform this action. And so it's really at the highest level, it's the reducer determining what state we're in, but it's also the action working with the reducer. So you have this, so it kind of comes a little bit clear why they're called actions, because we want the reducer to perform an action, right? We want the reducer to perform an action which changes the state. So we want to have this separation of concerns when we talked about where should the logic live, either in the actions or the reducers. We want to have this idea that reducers only change state. They only change our current state. And actions are going to be where we determine what state we want to tell the reducer to be in. Okay, so really they share power for sure, but most of the power lies in the actions, right? The reducer is just following the orders from the action. That's a finite state machine. I don't want to get super deep into it. I just want to bring that concept forward. And so when we're designing our applications, it's always a really good idea, especially when we design our reducer. Remember last week when you said, a bunch of you asked, like, oh, which parts of this should you do first? I always do the state first, okay? Because that lets me know, like, at what points is this application going to be in? Where what states should it be in, right? If I can determine the state first and foremost, then I can make my actions and reducers kind of adhere to that and revolve around that state. Okay, then when it comes to actions and reducers, then it's just on the fly when you need them, right? So I always build my state first before I build any other thing, especially actions. I think the actions should come when you need them, okay? So that's a finite state machine. I know it's a little bit more theoretical. There are some great articles on that. Wikipedia article is good. This article is great as well. So goes pretty in depth into, you know, it's not a super long article, but it goes very in depth into how we use it, right? We have submit, failure, submit, try again, success, etc. Or these different states that we can be in at one time. So that's that. Any questions on finite state machines or developing our state to be used like this? See some typing, so I'll wait a moment. A different type of program flow compared to what, Brett? I feel like, and we have done something like this in the past, and we're going to revisit that today, and actually probably right this second, not this second, but right now, where we have had different states that our application was in. So it is a different type of program flow compared to other ways of doing things, but I think it's a really good idea to think in the state machine paradigm and really go with it because I think it's a really great concept and a good way to keep our application clean. And by all means, you are, especially if you build a larger application, you will never think of every possible state the first go through, right? A seasoned software architect might be able to think of the most of them, but it's something that takes a lot of time, and then things are going to come up as you're developing, and you're gonna add to it. If it's in a certain state, only certain things are possible. That's correct, Brett. Okay, the unknowns are gone, right? Or they should be, if we've utilized it correctly. Only certain things are possible, right? There is only 2 states that this turnstile could ever be in, and if it is not in one of these states, what is it? Broken. It's totally broken, right? What if that thing just free spins whenever and then will occasionally lock up, right? It's totally broken. It's not in either of those states, and we need to fix it, okay? In New York in the 7th, didn't you just like hop over them? I don't know. But yeah, it's broken, right? And so if we find that our application is in this limbo state that we've never kind of defined for it, then we know that it's broken and we need to go fix it. Ashley, a little confused on how action will handle to create the finite options. What's the example of this? You know you will. Absolutely. That's what tonight's all about, sort of. Not all about, but that's a big part of tonight. So, you know what? Let's jump into it. Let's see it. How do I do this? We do that. Look at our old friend Doggos here. Okay. Doggos, if you remember, is in, it has certain states. What states does our Doggos app have? If anyone remembers. You can also see on the screen. the states that it can possibly be in. It can be in a loading state. You're all good. It can be in an error state. It can be in an input state. Yep. Right. So we're currently like not in any loading or error state. And we can be in, like, I would say, a success state. So where we have success, so our errors are gone, our loading is gone, our dogs array is populated, and we're good to go, right? So let's start converting our Doggos app. And for those that want to follow along, there is the link to this specific code sandbox. So let's start converting our Doggos app into a Redux application. Once again, this is a completely contrived example. This doesn't need to be in a Redux. We don't need Redux for this. And I would never expect, if you were to build an application like this, that you would use Redux in this because it's too small. All right, it's the overhead for using Redux in this is too large for any kind of benefit we're going to get out of it. But we're going to do it simply as practice. So we are just in our plain application right now, and let's start converting this over. Just for a refresher, let's go through it and see what it does. So let's just come down here. This is our app file, right? Our index is a pretty standard plain old index file. Our app has a div, has an h1. We have a search box component, which takes a fetch dogs prop, and that prop is a method that will hopefully update our state here. We have an h2, and we have a dogs list. The dogs list takes an error prop. If there is an error, it takes that array of dogs as a dogs prop, and it takes that Boolean loading. Okay, let's go into search box first. Search box is simply an input, right, which has an on change and has a value. Since we are using an input, we are using what we call a controlled input. We need to make search box a class component. Why do we have it? Why do we need to make it a class component? Yeah, we need to use state, right? And so since we need to use state just on our input alone, we need to make it a class component so that we can maintain that state for the input. Little question I'd love for you to answer. When we convert this over to a Redux app, do I need to include this as part of state? I like Brett's answer. Not necessarily, but you're all right. No, we don't. Can we? Can we do it as part of state? Yeah, sure. We absolutely can. It's a lot more overhead, but it might benefit us in the long run. If you find that you want to have this as part of your application level state, maybe you're inputting something in here and 17 components over, it's using exactly what you've inputted. That's a great place to use that. For this example, no, we're just going to leave this in our component level state here. Okay, so we don't need to convert all state over to Redux, and we can still use regular state even if we are also using Redux, and we can still use regular props. Remember that, even if we are using Redux. Okay. Redux is there to assist us in a very specific area of state management, okay? And that's all it's there for. We can still continue to use React exactly the way we used it before, but without prop drilling. Okay, so we have an input change, very, very, very standard input change. I could even change this to breed instead of using e.target.name, but it's so standard that I just included that. Seems like there's migration towards functional programming. Classes might go away in the near future with React. Classes, I'll say in the future, classes will go away in React. When hooks are fully integrated, you're going to start to see all functional components. But we're a ways out from that still. So learning how state works and how things like this work are going to benefit you greatly when you start using hooks in the future. So yeah, classes will go away eventually. But for now, they are the gold standard in React. So we have a button that calls a search for breed on click. Search for breed is going to prevent default. We don't really need to because we're not using a form, but I threw it in there anyways. It's going to call that fetch dogs with the breed, and then it's going to set the state of the breed back to nothing. Okay. So the fetch dogs, let's go look at that, is going to take a breed that's going to be a string. We now get to see the different states this application can be in. So it went from, and I want to say even if there are dogs in here, it's still the same exact state as if there are no dogs in there. Because dogs is displaying whatever's in that array no matter what. And that is just our, I want to call it our resting state, okay? Where no matter what, if there are items in here, if there are not items in here, it's the same. So this is the same state as having a list of dogs down here. Okay, I want to call that our resting state. Then we have our loading state, which means we are sending a request to an outside API to get some data, and we are currently in the loading state. We are no longer in the resting state. We are now in the loading state. We use Axios, and we use the get method to get a list of breed of images. And then if we have a response, we are then going to populate that array with the data. We are then going to leave the loading state and go back into the resting state. And then we also need to make sure that we clear any errors that might be there. Okay, so that's on success. On error, if we get a rejection from our promise, then we are going to go into our error state. Okay, we're going to leave our loading state. We're going to go into our error state. And that's where we'll stay until we go into our success, which would be our resting state. Okay. So we have three distinct states that we can be in: resting, loading, and error. And dogs list is going to take the error, display an error if there is one. If it's loading, we're going to display a loading message. Otherwise, we're going to display a list of dogs. Okay, and so this really is where our finite state machine really shines, is in here, because we determine what state we're in, and then we display that in here. Any questions on this right now? Like I said, we built this 2 weeks ago, so it's the same exact one we built together. Questions? All right, then, let's get Redux involved. So what's the first thing we need to do in order to get Redux involved? Yep. So those are all the first things we need to do, right? First thing we need to do is install Redux and React Redux. Yep. Then we need to import it, and then we need to create a store. So those are all the things we need to do at first. So let's go in and let's install Redux, and let's install React Redux. Okay, so we got Redux and we have React Redux in here now. What do we got an error in here? What? There we go. Why is it saying we have an error? It's not. Okay, I think I have an issue with, there we go. With Code Sandbox, it's got an error from another sandbox, and it's kind of come over. So it's a little weird, but you shouldn't have that issue if you're working on this locally on VS Code with Create React App. Okay, so now we have installed Redux and React Redux. We need to import, what do we need to import? We need to import create store from Redux. We also need to import provider from React Redux. Oops, Redux, eventually. But let's just do create store right now. Create store. Okay, and then we need to create a store, right? So let's go const store equals create store. And create store is a method or a function, which is going to take what as its only, well, right now, as we know it, it's only argument. We're actually going to see multiple arguments today. We need to take a reducer, right? So create store is going to create our store from our reducer. Okay, no worries if this is like, if you're like, oh yeah, I totally forgot. That's fine. That's what we're here for. So it's going to take a function, right? A reducer is a JavaScript function. That is all it is. So let's do something crazy, and let's just do this. It is a JavaScript function, right? That's all it is. What are the two arguments that that function takes? State, action, right? I'm just going to do something. I'm going to return name. Yeah. Is this, oh my gosh, I might need to refresh this whole thing. Save it. Might work better that way. Okay. Save, save, save. Let me actually see if this opens up in a new screen. Better, I hate it. I hate that error that keeps happening. It's not actually on our. Okay. Is this, for the time being, does this reducer work? Will it work? Yeah, totally, right? We're returning state. No matter what action we get, we're always going to return that same state. So it's obviously not a reducer we'd want to use, but let's just use it for right now. All right. So what's the next step we have to do? Now that we have a reducer, we have a store. I'm not going to connect it quite yet. Yeah, we're going to get that provider first, right? We need the provider in order to pass that store down. And that comes from React Redux. And remember last week I said everything we're going to use this week is from React Redux. Well, today we're going to use some other stuff from Redux as well. But we then take that provider and we wrap our entire application in it. And what prop does provider take? Yeah, store. We'll just pass the store to it. And I want to call this something else. We'll call this my store. Just so that it's different names so that there's no confusion on what's going on right here. Okay. And then we are going to close that out. What type of component is provider? Higher order component, exactly. Why is it a higher order component? What's it doing? Yeah, it's extending the functionality of app, right? It's giving it something. So it's extending the functionality of app. Cool. So we're set up in our index now. Let's come into our app, and we want to use that store in our app in just this component here. What do we need to do to use that store, that state in this component? Yeah, we need to connect it. And we do that by importing connect. You'll notice that I like to keep all of my my third-party libraries together, all of my internal stuff together, so I can find out what I need very quick. Okay, and so we need to get connect. Remember, this is from React Redux now, because we are connecting. What are we connecting to? We're connecting to the store that the provider has given us, okay? So connect and provider talk to each other, and connect hits up provider and says, hey, where's the store? And provider's like, oh, there it is. And connect's like, okay, cool, thanks, right? So provider provides the store, connect connects that store to the app, to the component, all right? Okay, so we want to, we're already pretty set up for it, that's sweet. We wanted to connect this app, so we're gonna move our export, and then we are going to export the connect. And remember, connect, it gets called 2 times, right? This first time, it returns a function, and the second time, we got to give it the app. Okay, so we're going to call connect 2 times. The second time, we're going to give it the app. What do we give in the first for our arguments to connect in the first parentheses? MSTP. I love the acronym. Because, I mean, I know you've written it a lot. Doesn't map state to props just get like tedious to write? MST3K, perfect. I love it. It just gets tedious to write to me, but I'm going to write it out. And a lot of times you'll just see it written right in line. Let's see, what does MSTP take? What one argument does it take? The state, right? And what is that state? It's the current state, and it's the store, right? It's whatever this is. This is what gets passed into it, okay? Whatever that is, right? Just keep that in mind. We call it state. Like I said, I wish we called it store. I wish it was map store to props, but it's not, so well, it's got a deal. And then what are we going to return from map state to props? We want to return an object, okay? And what's in this object? All of those answers are right. Whatever you want to give it access to from the store, yep, it's props, right? We are creating new props in here. We're creating an object of props, okay? Is what we're doing. Inside this object, we're creating new props. So I want to just say name. And I want to give it now state.name, right? Because that name is on our state, right? That's our state, our global state. So we have a name key on there. So we're just going to map the name prop to whatever this is, okay? Any questions on that? I know it's kind of a harder concept to really dig in. All right, we're going to pass map state to props. And let's come use it somewhere. Hello. This dot props dot name. Look at there. we are now using it, right? We have put that name and prop that's being passed to our app as the name prop. Okay, so we can now use that name anywhere we want, and let's go change it. First name I see is Layla. And now we can manipulate that based on our store. Okay, let's create an actual reducer for this now. We're gonna come in here. We're gonna say reducers. Oh no, that's a file. I want a folder. Reducers, new file, name reducer. All right, so let's just copy over our current reducer, throw it in there. We're going to export this. We'll give it a name reducer. It wants one. We'll come into here. We're going to import that reducer. Is it called name? Yeah. Let me open this up and make sure it's not names. Okay, yep. Name reducer. We'll throw that in there. It should still work. Oop, not if I do it twice. All right, still working. Okay. Save that. I'll save that. All right, so this is just returning a name for us. So now let's build this reducer out a little bit. We're going to create a initial state. So I'm going to say let. We can actually say const as well. Initial state equals. This is our initial state. All right, so we have this initial state, and what we want to do is we want to set that as our default, because what happens when return state? What happens when the application is initialized? Does anyone know? When create store is first called, what happens? It's going to call this function. It's going to call this reducer. And what is it going to pass into the reducer? Right? Because create store and the store itself will always call the reducer. It's going to pass in null as the initial state. Okay, so we're going to use this default state to say, if this doesn't exist, which null says it doesn't exist, then default to this. All right, and just make state whatever this is. Every time after that, what is state going to be? State is going to be what the current state is, right? Just whatever the current state is. Every single time, we're going to get the current state passed in here, and we're going to get an action. And we're going to say, hey, reducer, perform this action on that current state and return a new state for us. That's what we're asking the reducer to do. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, we are going to take a break. Let's take a little break. I'm going to work through this a little bit because I want to get a little ahead, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I've done. 5-minute timer. Cool. Let's be back in 5. All right, everyone, come on back. And we will continue on our journey. Let me move this back over here. I've gone ahead and done a little bit of work on this. I'll save that since we last spoke. Make sure that I'm caught up on our messages. So essentially what I did was I brought a switch statement into our reducer, right? So we're going to actually switch on something. I have, what's that? Created an action, okay? So we'll go over that in just a moment. And then I've also created an input, and we're not going to do that. We're going to get rid of that, and we're going to say name. Another really simple input, and we'll see that in action in a moment. Okay, so it's essentially just the same as our breeds. We're just going to change the name on our reducer here by it. Okay, so coming into our name reducer, let's go to our action. When we call this action, we are going to pass it a string of whatever the name we want to change it to is. Remember that it needs to return an action. So this is an action creator. We need to return an action. What is an action in its simplest terms? It is a plain old JavaScript object. Okay, that's what an action is. What is a defining feature of an action? Not just that it's an object, but it has a type. Right? We need to have that type in there. So our type in here is going to be change name. I have created a constant of change name, so I can, bring it. I can make this whatever I want. This is always going to change the name for me. Okay, and then I've given it a payload, and I can call this whatever I want, but this is the payload, and I'm going to call it name, or I'm going to call it payload. I'm going to pass the name into that. Okay, so that's our action creator at work. So now what happens when that action gets dispatched? What happens then? If that action gets dispatched, and we're actually going to dispatch our own actions tonight. We've been relying on Connect to dispatch it for us. Yep, so the store is going to call the reducer. What is it going to pass in for the state? Current state, whatever the current state is, right? And then what is it going to pass in for the action? It's actually going to pass this entire object to it, okay? It's the whole object. This is the action. So this is going to be passed in as the action. So if I wanted to get the type, what do I need to type in here? Action.type. If I wanted to get the payload, what do I type? Action.payload, right? It's an object. So we can get that. So what are we going to switch on? What is our switch statement going to switch on? Our action.type. It's always going to take action.type because this could take any number of types. All right. And so I need to bring in import change name from. If you use a string for this, it's fine. Nothing's going to break. But this is just a way that you're going to see it done a lot. We're going to have a constant that's going to be assigned to a string, and then we're going to import it in our reducer. Okay, so now that we have our change name, we were going to switch on action type, and we want to do something when we get that change name. What comes in our switch that we can do something based on that? Yes, it's our case. So we can have a case. How many cases can we have per switch statement? if there's a limit, I don't know it. Okay, I've never even gotten close to reaching that. I don't know if it's infinite, but it's not something that we're worried about. All right. So now, when we have this changed name, what do we want to return? What is our reducer actually doing? It's going to return something. It's going to return a new state, right? We don't actually need to copy any of our state in here. We can just return a new state. But just for practice, let's return a copy of our old state and then reassign the keys that we want it to. How do you want to copy this state? We know 2 different ways of copying an object. All right, you want to take the easy route. Totally fine. Now that we have this, you'll probably very rarely ever see object assign again. Okay, so now we have the spread operator on our old state, right? That's the state being passed in. And now how do we set a new state on here? What do we want to change? What on more state do we want to change? Yep, we want to change the name key, and we want to pass it whatever our payload is, right? Does this reducer care what the payload is? Is it going to know what the name is? No, it doesn't care, right? We know that we're getting some data, and then we're going to where the action is telling us what action to take to change the state, and we are going to do that diligently as the reducer. Okay. All right, so this should work, right? We have action type, we have change name. Remember, you always need a default, because when does the default get run? No matter what. The default always gets run in initialization. Our action type on initialization is at init, and you never want a case for at init, okay? And it's even got its own symbols, and you couldn't even really get it if you wanted to. We want it to go through to the default, okay? So name input. All right, we now want to be able to change the name from name input. We want to be able to call that action. So what do we need to do first? Remember, this is just an input that I created while you were on break. Very simple input form. We want to import connect. Okay. What else do we need to import? We need to import the action creator itself. We need to import that function, right? Import. And what did we call that? I believe we called that change name. I know we did. A little tricky thing here, you might notice that I'm just referring to the folder. Since we have an index file in there, we don't have to refer to the actual file. It will automatically do that for us, but you are more than welcome to do that as well, okay? Index will automatically get generated for us. Okay, so now that we have changed name, right, and we do not export default on our actions, okay? We're just gonna export, so we need to destructure it. Now what do we do? We're going to connect, right? And since we've already gone over this, and I know you know the answer, let's give it in here. We're going to give the name of the component. And now, what do we want to pass in? What part of the state do we need on name input? So actually, and you haven't had a chance to look over name input, we don't need anything. Oh, No, the state. Okay. We don't need any part of that state. We have our own state, and I should have called that something else, but I'm not going to change it now. We actually don't need to worry about what the actual name is on here. Okay. We're only worried about how to change that name. So, and you can do this, you can just type null in for the first, for map state to props. Remember I said there's a shorthand way, but I wanted you to learn map state to props every single time first. You can just type null in there. And what is the second argument that connect takes? It's an object. And what do we call this object? Map dispatch to props. Not map state to dispatch, map dispatch to props. And so now we're going to create a new prop, and I'm going to call this change name. I'm going to pass it change name. We're going to see in a few moments how this is working. Okay, this is going to give us a new prop to name input called change name, and it's going to dispatch that for us. All right. So I can go, let's say, change the name is going to be our, there you go, this dot change the name. We are going to prevent default. We are going to set the state back to nothing. And in here, we're going to call, what are we going to call on props? And we can actually do this. Let's do this. Let's call this change name action. Yeah, we're going to call this prop. And what should we pass it? Going to expect a string of the name. And yeah, since we have state on here, we're going to say this dot state dot name. All right, let's bring it in to our app. I'm going to get rid of this search box here. Oh, of course. And we're going to bring in name input. We don't need to pass it any props because we're already getting all the props we need, but we do need to import it. Now we can change the name. So I'm going to change the name to Arpita because I saw your name first. And now it's working. Brett. Jonathan. And let's go and look at this in our Redux DevTools. What the heck? Don't think this is the... Let's refresh this. So this is an older, this is kind of funny. Lock, no. Ah, you're right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So let's do this instead. Let's not use our Redux DevTools, and let's use something called Redux Logger. So that's where we're gonna go next in our lesson tonight. We're going to learn how to implement something called middleware in Redux. So what middleware is, yes, what middleware is essentially this piece of software that intercepts our actions that before they get to our reducer. So essentially, let's draw it out. What we have, remember we have our UI, right? Boom, boom, boom. And then we have our action. And then we have our reducer. Oh, where's that? I'm really bad at this. Reducer. Store. Boop. 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 Okay, so our action reducer. So what happens is middleware will actually come in here. Middleware. And it will say, nope, I'll take that. And then it passes through this other piece of software, does something to the action, and then passes it on to the reducer. Okay. So this middleware is actually hijacking our action. Where else have we seen something similar to this? Does anyone remember something similar we've seen to this? Not with Redux, but with with React. React router, yep, right. Even last week we saw that Connect does this to our props. Remember, Connect intercepts the props coming in, and then it puts some new props on there, and then it passes all of those new props on. That's what this is doing. So Connect, I think you could sort of consider it kind of a piece of middleware, whereas it's hijacking, it's rerouting the props, and in this case we're going to reroute the actions through some other software, and then we'll pass it on through to the reducer. Okay, so let's get back to that. Let's clear this, and you can see a much better drawn, right? So we can see our component calls the action creator, returns an action, which then flows through our middleware. Okay, middleware comes first. Thanks. And then it's passed on to our reducer, which then updates the state. All right. So we are going to use another method from Redux, from the Redux package called apply middleware. All right. And we are going to bring in something called Redux logger. Okay. So let's come back into our project here. We are going to bring in Redux logger. So this is a separate dependency. And then what we're going to do is go into our index, and right where we get create store, we are going to get apply middleware. All right. So let's come look at our training kit again. Apply middleware, goes directly into our create store function. It goes as the second parameter. Where else have we put something in the second parameter before? Ashley? We put those dev tool lines, right? That line of code that we want our dev tools to go to make sure that we're doing that. All right, so that's our second parameter in create store, second argument. So let's just come in, and we'll need to bring in logger as well. So not only that, we're also going to import logger from Redux logger. And let's come right in here, apply middleware, and let's just put logger right in it. Okay. A couple things about apply middleware. If we look back at this graph, we'll see that it goes action, then middleware, then reducer. We'll see that this is a linear thing, okay? We can apply as many pieces of middleware as we want. The order that we put them in absolutely matters, okay? So we are putting Logger in first. We always, if using Logger in your production app, want Logger to come last, all right? Logger is going to console log for us what our actions are, and we want to have like a full picture of what they are. What gets passed to the middleware? Okay, great. I did not cover that clearly. We actually import whatever the middleware we want. Oh, what gets passed to it? What gets passed to middleware is dispatch, the action, the current state. I believe are the three things that get passed to the middleware. The dispatch function, the action, and the current state. Yep. We're going to use a really sophisticated piece of middleware today called Redux Thunk. And Redux Thunk, you can actually rewrite it in 4 lines of code. And we'll see it. I'll show you later on that it's actually only 4 lines of code. But it just gets past these items. It manipulates them somehow and passes it back. Okay, so let's go look at this now. All right. First name on is Noah. So let's change name. And now look at this. This middleware, the logger, actually, we don't have our, if we look, our Redux is not lit up. Our DevTools are not lit up. What it's doing for us is it's grabbing the action before it gets sent to the reducer. And it's saying, and actually it looks like it's getting passed through the reducer as well. Or it's determining what the reducer is going to return. And it gives us our previous state, which that's our previous state. It's going to give it the action, the entire action, right? We have the type of change name and payload of Noah. And then we get our next state from it. So this is really beneficial when we want to see what our app's doing. Yes, you can style all of your console logs using inline styles. Let's see, Ashley, you're up next. And so we see those 3 different actions that just happened there. We don't get that initial action because that happens before this is initialized. So that in it, we don't get to see. If you want to see that, you'll need to load up your DevTools. Otherwise, this is what you get. Actually, this is a very slimmed down version of the Redux DevTools, right? We cannot time travel with this. We can't, jump to and from our different actions. We can see what actions are being called, but that's it, right? That's all this is doing. This is just logging our actions and our state for us, okay? So yeah, this is handy if you want something very lightweight. Should you keep this in your production level application? No, you don't want this, right? This is just for development purposes. The console is only for developers, so we don't want to keep it in. So yeah, take that out when you are pushing to production level stuff. Cool. So now we know how middleware works, right? It intercepts that action. It does something. In this case, it's going to console log it for us, and then it's going to pass it on through, right? It just reroutes the action for us. Okay. So let's come back into our app now, and let's do something. We are going to, let's just call this reducer. I'm going to call it reducer. Reducer. And now we want to bring our dogs into the mix. Let's call that reducer. I'm going to show you combined reducers on Wednesday. You can't edit mine. So you can edit yours as whatever you want to do. And we'll call that. It's the beauty of Code Sandbox. You can edit yours all you want. So we're going to come in, and we have that name. That's fine. That was just a fun little example. But we want to now go into our app, and we want to transfer all of our state into our Redux global state. All right. So what items do we need to add to our state, to our application level state? Well, yeah, we should add all of these items, right, to our application level state. So let's go in. Let's go into here, and I don't want to change this to just reducer. We'll see how to use more than one reducers on Wednesday. I think that's a good time. All right. And let's add some stuff to our initial state here. So this is really where we're going to come in with our finite state machine now. We're going to have a name state, of course, but we're really caring right now about dogs, the error, and the loading states. Okay? So now this should still work exactly the same way. Let's go, Layla. Oh, you're already on there. Bernard. Okay, still works. Okay, everything's working, right? Because we are spreading our state, so we're still getting all of these onto our state when we want. All right. Let's go and utilize them. So where are we using those pieces of state? Dogs, error, and loading. We're using them on the dogs list, right? We have error, dogs, and loading on here, okay? So let's go into our dogs list, and let's connect this, right? What kind of component is this? This is a functional component, right? Stateless, functional, also known as presentational, because it's really just presenting some data, just not doing anything. So what we need to do is we need to import connect from React Redux. And then I need to actually give this a name. So we're going to call this function dogs doge equals, oh, nope, can't do that with a function. That's ES6 syntax. Let's do it like that. Cool, there we go. Now we are going to export default connect dogs. And what's our first item in our connect? What do we need? We mean our map state to props. So let's map state to props. It takes state as its one argument, and it's going to return something. What do we want to call our props on here? Yeah, we want to call it, right? We have error, we have loading, and we have dogs on here, right? So we should give them all those. Can we do this? Can we just do that? We can do this, actually. We absolutely can do this. If you were using every single item on the state, this is totally acceptable, okay? But we are not using every single item on the state. We are not using the name on that, right? So it is unnecessary. And in this application, that's fine. But in a large application, you absolutely don't want to do that because you're going to be getting a lot more re-renders than you need. Okay, it's just like we don't pass every single prop to every component, right? Why don't we pass all of these to the name input and the search box? Because they don't need them. Okay, it's the same as we don't want to just pass every prop from the global state down. This is an issue that you'll see in the wild, and now that you know about this, you're going to be like, whoa, who built this? Like this component takes all the whole state. No, we want to make sure that we are very detailed about exactly which items in the state we want to take. So I'm going to go error, state.error, dogs, state.dogs. And then we're going to have loading of state.loading. Okay. We are then going to pass map state to props in. And do we need to dispatch any actions within our Brett, are there any instances where you only need to access the action creator, but not any global state props? There absolutely are. And we just went over that one, right? Where we went null. We don't need any state on this input, right? But we want to throw some action creators in there. Okay. So yeah, there is a case where that happens. But yeah, on dogs lists, we don't need to dispatch anything on here. Okay. So we don't need to pass a second argument in. Why do we need to pass null in here? Yeah, because map dispatch to props is the second argument, right? So we have to have something as the first argument in order to get to the second argument. So yeah, that's why we have to pass null into there, just so you know. If otherwise, we don't have to pass anything. If we don't need to get to the second argument, we don't have to include it, okay? All right, so let's come into our, let's close all this. We'll go into our here, and we'll go boom. Let's get rid of that. And now it's gonna be like, whoa, I don't know what you're doing. Okay, name's gonna work. Doggos isn't gonna work now, right? So let's talk about our search box. Let's go into search box, and we'll see that what it does is, well, this isn't search box, but let's go get search box back in. Okay, search box is here. What it does is we're going to enter a name of a breed of dogs into here, and we're going to click find dogs, and then what's going to happen to us? We are going to call the fetch dogs prop, which is a method, and we're going to pass the breed into it, just like in our name input. Okay, and let's go look at what it's doing in here. We're going to have the breed in here, and then we're going to set the state. The loading is true. We're going to make an Axios call, and then based on that, we are going to return a response. All right, and we're going to set the state based on whatever that response is. So if we want to call this, where should we place this fetch dogs within our Redux flow? Yeah, this should go in an action, right? We want to call this function just like we're calling the change name. We're going to get fetch dogs, and we're going to get a string. That's it. So let's do this. Let's come in. Let's go into our actions, and let's do export function fetch dogs, and we're going to get a little bit of different syntax in here. Okay, so let's step through this now. What what different states do we need? So what kind of types should we have? What kind of actions should we have in here? Let's think about our finite state machine and the different states that our app can be in. Just give me one. Error, loading, I'd say resting or success, but yeah, okay. So let's create those. Export const error. Loafing. I gotta think of how to call this last one. We can call it success. Or rest, but I want to call it success. That's fine with me. Okay, so now we have this fetch dogs, and what's the first thing we need to do? Remember, this is an action creator. We need to return an action from it, right? Anyone have any ideas? It's a trick question, by the way, but I want to hear your ideas. Oh, that's someone typing. I want to hear an idea. Return a function? I'll admit it's a trick. That's fine. I don't want you racking your brain too hard. Return a function. So what's going to happen is our connect is going to dispatch whatever this returns. Okay. So it is a trick question because we can't deal with this. Redux out of the box is only for synchronous processes. Okay. We can return something instantaneously. We can use Redux out of the box. Redux does not work for async things, right? And we very much have an async issue here. We have this Axios call. So we need to bring in a piece of middleware called Redux Thunk, okay? Redux Thunk allows us to grab a hold of that dispatch, which we haven't used yet, and then allow us to call it whenever and however many times we want, okay? So it allows us to dispatch actions in an asynchronous manner. Remember, let's go back through our flow of what happens with middleware, right? A component calls the action creator, and the action creator returns an action, which then flows through the middleware. So what happens here is Redux Thunk actually grabs the action, and it will take that action and send off a fake one. And so then Redux thinks it's been updated, and then it will allow us to call dispatch whenever we want, okay? So it really needs to, we need to do it in order to see it. So what we're actually going to do, so let's see who was right up there. Noah was correct. We are going to return a function, and that function is going to give us access to dispatch. So first things first, let's go and bring a new dependency in. Redux Thunk. I spell it right. Redux Thunk, okay? We now have Redux Thunk, and if we want to use middleware, where do we include that middleware at? Noah, yes it does. Yeah, we want to include it in our create store, right? Remember, I said that you can put as many pieces of middleware in apply middleware as you want. Logger should always come last, so we're going to keep it last. what we're going to do is we're going to say import Thunk from Redux Thunk. Okay. I'm going to say this right off the bat. This is going to seem fairly complicated, but it is very simple in what it does. So let's put that in. And now, miraculously, we have access to Redux Thunk. I'd like to take 5 minutes. We'll come back and we'll implement an asynchronous action into our application here. 5 minutes and I'll see you then. Reset. Let's go. All right, come on back. So I want to just reiterate and go over exactly what's happening when we use create middleware or apply middleware, excuse me, right? We are having a component call an action creator. So let's just go back to our, before we have applied middleware, component calls the action creator, which returns an action, which connect then dispatches to our reducers, okay? Which the reducers update the state and the state gets sent back to the component, all right? So the action creator returns an action, gets dispatched to our reducers automatically through connect, which then updates the state. With middleware, it's the same exact thing, but our action gets passed to the middleware first, okay? The middleware then manipulates the action however it sees fit, and then passes that manipulated action to the reducer. The middleware gets a couple of things. It gets the dispatch method itself. It gets something called get state, which allows you to get the current state. And that's it, right? It gives you dispatch and it gives you get state. So when we use Thunk, Thunk is getting dispatch. And what it does, if we're returning a function for Thunk, it's going to detect if that's a function or not, and it's going to do something. If it detects that it's just a plain old regular action, then it's just going to pass the action on like nothing happened, okay? If it detects that it's a function, which we are going to do here in our asynchronous stuff, then it will fake Redux out, pass on this fake action, and let us override and overtake Redux and give us access to dispatch, okay? Before we deep dive into Thunk, I want to show you the source code for Redux Thunk. This is the source code for the entire middleware. This is it. Now, it's going to seem a little weird because we have like function, returning a function, returning a function, returning a function, but this is the source code for Redux Thunk, okay? This is it. And really, we're only concerned with these lines right here. This is it. That's all it is, okay? So it's going to detect if, right, it gets the action. It's going to detect if the type of action is a function. If it is, it's going to give us dispatch and these other things, which we're not worried about those. We're really worried about dispatch. Otherwise, it's just going to return the action as is. That's it. Okay, that's all Thunk does. So let's, now that we have this knowledge, and I'll pass this on to you, this is the actual source code from GitHub, from Redux Thunk here. Let's go use it now. So we know that we can return a regular whole action. That's fine. It's still going to work. We can also return a function. So let's do that. Return. And I'm just going to return an anonymous function here. What arguments can this function take? What parameters, I should say. Dispatch doesn't need the action. It needs dispatch, first of all, right? Look back at that source code. It's right there on Slack. You'll see that return action, dispatch, get state, and extra argument. We're really only concerned with the dispatch part for now. So let's just go dispatch. We can get the state if we want to and do something based on that, but it kind of seems a little in the face of what Redux is. We want our reducer to do something based on the state. So let's just take dispatch in and let's bring this whole item into here. Oop. So dispatch is a function. We call dispatch. Does anyone know what we pass in for dispatch? We pass an action in. Perfect. Yep. Correct, Layla and Ashley. We pass an action in, right? What is an action? call it a plain old JavaScript object, right? So we can pass in an object and we can call dispatch as many times as we want, whenever we want. We now have access to that, okay? So let's do this right now. What's the first state that we want to dispatch? What state do we want to be in as soon as we go fetch dogs? Loading, right? So let's dispatch our loading state. Let's go type loading. Okay, so this is going to, no matter what, as soon as fetch dogs is called, this is going to synchronously dispatch our loading state. It's going to tell us that we are now in that loading state. Let's go into our reducer and let's write a case for loading. Case loading. We're going to return new state, right? A copy. And this time we want loading to be true. Right? Does this make sense to everyone? Oh, we didn't get loading yet. Let's go get all those. We have loading, error, and success. Okay. So yeah, we just saying that we're now in a loading state, right? Let's go to our next item. Okay, well, we need to bring in Axios because we don't have Axios in here. So we need to import Axios. Okay, so now we can call our regular old Axios get to the URL we want to get it to. And when we get our response back, what do we want to do with that response? We can wait, right? Now that we have access to dispatch, we can wait for that response to come back. In the past, if we would have done this, it would have never returned what we wanted it to return, okay? But now we can wait for that to come back and then we can dispatch it. So let's go dispatch. And essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna say type of success, and let's give it a payload of, what should our payload be? Yep, response data message, right? Remember, this is an array of URLs for images of dogs. Okay, so we've dispatched that. Do we need to include loading of false and error of nothing? And why don't we? Let's think about it. A reducer is going to do it, but it's implied, right? It's implied with our success state, okay? Our error, we're not going to have an error, and we're not going to be in loading if we're in success state. We're in loading state at one point, we're in success state at one point, and our catch, we're going to be in an error state. And those are the three different states we're going to be in at all times. Only one of them at a time, right? So let's go into our reducer and let's do a success. Oh man, it just bugs me when it does that. Okay, so what are we going to return now? Let's walk me through this. We're going to return a new object. We're going to spread state. Thank you. And now what are we going to do? Loading is false? Right, yeah, because if we are in success, we are no longer in the loading state, and so loading was going to be false, no matter what, right? Does that make sense to everyone? I just want to make sure that we are not in the loading state anymore. The only time loading should be true is when we are in the loading state. Okay, so loading is false. We are then going to pass that array to dogs. And remember, that's action.payload. Oh, did I call it payload? What did I call it? Yep, I called it payload. Okay. Remember, you can call that anything you want. You could have called it dogs if you wanted to. I'm going to call it payload just to be consistent here. And then we want to set our error to nothing, right? Well, why are we setting it to nothing here when it's already set to nothing up here, to an empty string? Why is that happening? Yeah, because we could be in an error state when this is returned, right? We could be in an error state, and we want to get out of that error state no matter what. Because no matter what, when we are in a success state, we are not in an error state, and we are not in a loading state. Okay, so we want to make sure that those are all out of the way. Does that make sense? All right, let's go get our last state in here. So if we do get an error, what are we going to do here? Obviously, we're not setting state. We want to dispatch again. Will there ever be a time when this is dispatched and this is dispatched? Never. Not going to happen, right? Only one of these will be, right? Either if it's a rejected or a resolved. If it's resolved, it's going to dispatch this. If it's rejected, it's going to dispatch this. So just keep that in mind. There'll never be a time when both of them are dispatched. So what do we want to dispatch? Type of error. And we'll call this payload again of doggo not found. Okay. Once again, do I have to make sure that the dogs array is empty? Or that the loading is false? Nope, it is absolutely implied. If I'm in an error state, then there are no dogs and loading is false, okay? So let's go into here and let's create our last case for this reducer of error. We're going to return again a new object. Every single time we want to return a new object, remember, with our previous state, we want to make sure, since we are in error state, that we are no longer loading. There are no dogs loaded. And our error is action.payload. Let's see. The reducer will handle what the prop should be depending on the state. Yeah, so the reducer is going to say, this is our state, is loading. This is what our state should be. Okay. Now, it probably could come in here and say error is empty string and dogs is an empty array. If you wanted to, you could have done this way. Let's do it that way just to be consistent here. And let's actually be a little bit more consistent and go like that. All right. So in only one of these, look at this, in only one of these states is loading true, right? And every other state loading is false. In only one of these states are there dogs in the array, okay? Only one of these states is there an error, right? Because they can only exist in one state at a time. Joshua, no, we're not gonna dispatch on our own unless it's in a thunk. Okay, we do not need to. Connect will dispatch for us automatically. So now does this make a little bit more sense of what's happening here when we use connect? Connect is doing this. It's whatever is returned from that, it's dispatching for us. Okay, so when that's returned, it's going to dispatch it. That's what connect is doing. Very much so, like logic gates. Absolutely. So let's look at this. Look now, we have the ability to call asynchronous functions now and wait for them to finish loading or to reject, and then act on what they have come up with. Haha. All right, let's hook it up. So where do we need to bring in fetch dogs? Sorry, my volume was off. What do we need to do to search box? I was like, why aren't they answering? What do we need to do to search box to bring the action creator in? Thank you. Not sharing the right screen, volume's off on the mic. We need to import the function, right? This action creator is a function, and we need to connect search box. Why do we still need to connect search box? Aren't we using like thunks and dispatch is coming from somewhere else? We need to connect it because it's still following the same, it's still going to dispatch. Connect is going to dispatch, this function. If we didn't have thunk there, we'll see in a moment. If we didn't have thunk there, it's going to be like, whoa, I expected it to be an object, and you're going to give me a function instead. We're still going to dispatch the function. And then thunk's going to say like, oh, that's a function? Cool. I'm going to grab that, and I know what to do with it. All right. So we still need to connect it. And let's go import fetch dogs from, oh, this needs to be destructured because it was not a default. All right, we'll come back through. We're going to export default connect. We're going to pass search box in as our second call. What props do we need off of the state for map state to props for this search box? Oh, no. That's right. Yeah, we don't need any props, right? So we can just say no. And then we're going to map dispatch to props. So we're going to say fetch dogs. Let's call this thunk action is fetch dogs. And we're going to say fetch dogs thunk action. Okay. So remember, we're still connecting it. We still want to dispatch that function, even though it's a function, and then let Thunk take over. Okay. This should work. Let's go rip all of this out. We no longer need this state. We do not need to pass fetch dogs to search box anymore. Let's see if it works. Someone give me a dog breed. Maybe crested will work. It's like really weird. It needs like, and look at that. Let's look at that real quick. I typed in crested. What's the first state when I click find dogs that our application is in? Loading, right? So we're going to see that loading screen. We see that big red loading. Okay, now what state are we in? Error state, right? And now I'm going to put in Corgi because that was the next one in the list. When I click this, what state are we going to be in? Loading. And then what state are we hopefully going to be in? What state are we in now? And then success, right? So no, we don't have that error on the screen. We don't have that loading message, but we have these beautiful, cute corgis to look at, okay? Just look into his eyes and he says, I love thunks. That one does too, okay? Yeah, so we've now created this finite state machine, right? Where we are only in one state at a time. We are now in the success state. And I technically think, I would say, that our first state that we're in initially is success as well. Okay, and yeah, so there we go. Let's go in and let's go look at we have logger, remember. Logger is set up. We're gonna change the name, Dan. And look at this, previous state was name, Layla, loading, false, error, dogs. We have our action, which is change name. And then our reducer says, oh, the action tells me to change the name. I'm going to change the name to Dan. Okay, now that it's that. All right, let's go find dogs. And we're going to go pug because that was the next on the list. And now let's look at this. Let's look at all the actions that are dispatched when we click find dogs. We got our loading action was dispatched, right? Because that's what we said to dispatch first. There we go. We said dispatch loading first. So it went, okay, I dispatched the loading action. We've changed the state to everything. There's no dogs anymore. There's no error and loading is true. Then once that was returned, we then dispatched our success action. And let's look at our previous state. Look, loading was true in our previous state. There were no dogs, there was no error, and name was still Dan. We sent this action that said success. Please give us this payload and set it to dogs. So then we went and set loading to false, no error, and now dogs is this array. Cool stuff, right? Like, I love this. This is awesome. This gives us so much power in our reducers. And let's go do something, once again, crested. And let's check that out. We got loading, and then we get our error state, right? Because we got a 404 there. All right, and now we're in our error state here. So, no dogs, no error, loading is true. It's our loading state. Our error state says no dogs, loading is false, and now we have an error. Any questions on this stuff right now? Does this make sense? So I want to be able to answer any questions you have before you jump in and start implementing your own thunks, right? It really just a reminder, it is, oh, I don't have it pulled up anymore. Yeah, there it is. It is literally, even with weird stuff that we're not using, 14 lines of code. Okay. It is just allowing us to use dispatch whenever we want. It's all Thunk is. And it allows us to dispatch wherever and whenever we want when we get to certain places in our state. So yeah, we didn't introduce, the only new thing we introduced as far as connecting and getting all the boilerplate set up, the only thing we introduced today is apply middleware. Okay. And it's important to understand that this goes in order, because when you don't put it in order, you get some funny stuff like this. And dogs. Let's go back to corgis. They were really cute. And we get like action undefined. Why is it undefined there? Remember, action is undefined there because it isn't an action. It's a function. And so it doesn't know what to do with that. And it gets like this weird, look at this, it gets this weird function thing. And it's like, I don't know what to do with that. So make sure that loading is at the end, or logger is at the end of your middleware. It goes in order. Order matters. Yeah, setup. Just a little, it really, once you get that Redux boilerplate going and set up, and we'll introduce one little other thing on Wednesday, but other than that, this is it, right? We're fully in Redux now. We'll learn how to use multiple reducers on Wednesday, but it's the same thing. Cool, glad to hear. Awesome, well, I'm excited to get you guys going and started on your project. You have the Star Wars API tonight, and then Redux Friends. So there's 2 projects this week. They go in order. Star Wars API is first, Friends is second, I believe. And you'll if you finish API tonight, just go straight on to start on with Friends. We're gonna have a little bit of clarification on some stuff on Wednesday. Otherwise, this is Redux. You guys are kind of through Redux now and in it. So congratulations, and good luck with your assignment, your projects. Yeah, Swappy is Star Wars API is what it is. Swappy. And yep, awesome. That's it for tonight, everyone. Have a good night, and I'll see you on Wednesday. See ya.